Hello and welcome to a new episode of Journey of a Christian Writer. My name is M.L. Bull. I'm a Christian and women's fiction author, and in this episode I'm going to talk about the art of storytelling and American literature. The art of storytelling has been around for centuries. It went on, for example, when Native American tribes and African tribes passed down cultural folklores through generations. It helped with changing people's perspectives and influencing political views, as well as helping to establish new governmental structures and laws. Storytelling is what helped many of us to know about our family ancestors and our heritage backgrounds. It also just dates as far back as God's creation of the world and the universe and mankind in the written text that we know of as today as the Holy Bible. Stories have been around for a long time and have just helped with changing and helping to develop the society that we have today. The different phases of American literature is what really helped a lot of the different rights and things that we have in our modern age. In fact, if it wasn't for the writers of newspapers back in American literature time periods, and who wrote newspapers and who wrote journals and different novels and short stories, then there's a chance that certain rights that we have today we would not even have. The rights for women, different rights for women, different rights for African Americans, different rights for immigrants, we may not even have today if it wasn't for these different types of phases of American literature. The phases of American literature that took place in the past were Realism is the first one, and Naturalism, Regionalism, and Modernism. The first one, Realism, took place around the 1850s and 1860s into the 1910s, and pretty much helped with the development of what we have today called nonfiction, because these authors were writing about real life issues and problems that was going on during their time periods. One example is Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin, which came out in 1852 and really helped to raise awareness about slavery and allowed a white audience to experience and know the oppression that African Americans were experiencing, and it just helped to influence Northerners to get more involved into helping to abolish slavery. So that's an example of one story of literature during the Realism period. Realism, some other subjects of realism was also the production of railroads as well as the Civil War, which is what Harriet Beecher Stowe's novel is said to actually have influenced, was the Civil War. So that is just some subjects and things during the Realism period. Naturalism is another period of literature that was going on pretty much around the same time as Realism, and helped with raising awareness of poor working conditions as well as political corruption, and pretty much was going on during the Industrial Revolution that took place in the North, and helped to raise awareness of different issues such as child labor that was going on at the time. And then later in the 1800s, around the 1880s and into the 1910s, another period called Regionalism was also going on at the time. In this particular period is where people was writing based on the different regions of the country in America that they lived in. For example, those in the West was writing stories about how it is to live in the West. Those in the East was writing stories in the East, how it is to live there. And this helped to allow people who wasn't from those particular regions and not able to travel there because railroads wasn't everywhere yet. It just allowed people to know what it was like to live in these particular regions of the country, being that railroads wasn't productive in all areas of the country as of yet. And then there was Modernism. Modernism is a period of American literature that came out around the 1930s into the 1960s, and was where different authors was writing about the events that was taking place in these decades of the 20th century, such as the stock market crash, the Great Depression, and World War II, as well as the Civil Rights Movement. And a couple of the stories for this particular period in the beginning of the Modernism stage was Babylon Revisited by F. Scott Fitzgerald, who pretty much wrote in that short story about the stock market crash and how one man realized that he lost more than just money at that time, but he also lost his wife and his daughter, and he pretty much is trying to recuperate his life so that he can regain custody of his daughter in that particular story. But that is pretty much an example of a story in modernism. These different periods of American literature, I think, are very important because they help to evolve the society that we have today in America and in the world. And if you want to be a skilled writer, then I think it's a good idea that you read and evaluate these different classics of American literature, because by you knowing how these different authors wrote about different topics, some of which are still going on today, it can allow you to know how you can approach these issues and raise awareness of different situations in society, and how you can approach these issues, as well as seeing the different techniques that they used in their writing, because symbolism was very common in American literature in the past, and that's one thing that I admire about the classics of American literature, is how the authors use symbolism in very clever ways back in the old times of American literature. Some of which, I utilize, in my own writing, because that's one of the techniques that I like to use in my writing is symbolism. using different things and objects within your fiction to give hidden meanings, pretty much, is what symbolism is. One of my favorites in American literature that's a play is Trifles by Susan Glaspell. And this particular story just helped show the oppression of women and how many women were had limited rights during the 1910s, and it just showed the sadness that many women were feeling during that time. And it just also showed how women should stick together because of being in a male-dominated world. Because that's pretty much what the women in the play was doing. It's a play about an investigation, and it's men in the group and it's women in the group, but the women are the ones that actually solve the case because of paying attention to the small details within the play that the men pretty much just overlooked. And when they solve the case, they pretty much keep it secret and don't tell it because they don't want Miss Wright in the play to get into trouble. So they pretty much keep the secret at the end of the play. But it's very clever how Glaspell used symbolism in that particular play with the bird and the bird cage and the quilt within that particular play. If you've never read that play, then I think it'd be a good idea if you read that, because it's a very clever play that Susan Glaspell wrote using symbolism. But that is pretty much all that I have for this video about the art of storytelling and American literature. Stories are very important and can have a profound effect on society, and has over time. For example, during the 1920s, the newspapers that were written by black authors during that time, many of them raised awareness of the lynchings that was taking place in different newspapers at the time, colored newspapers, and it just helped to raise awareness of the issue of lynchings that was going on during that time. And it's just various other stories and things of literature that really help to change people's views. And yeah, if it wasn't for stories, there's a chance that our world and how it is today would not be the way that it is. So that is all that I have for this episode, and thank you for watching.